Written submission with a full and frank apology. I'm very sorry what's happened at HBOS. It has affected shareholders, many of whom are colleagues. It's affected the communities in which we live and serve. It's clearly affected taxpayers, and we are extremely sorry for the turn of events that's brought it about.
Anne Treneman was watching from the sidelines in her role as parliamentary sketch writer for The Times.
They weren't really sure what they were sorry for. They were sorry that things had gone badly wrong. But the fact that something like RBS, which is, we have had to pay for all, the taxpayers paid this incredible amount of money over to pick up the pieces that these four men had let slip through their fingers in the most incredible way. And they just didn't quite seem to get that. They didn't quite seem to get that every person in Britain was paying for their mistakes.
The apology was a general apology for the situation in which businesses in the country found themselves, rather than a personal apology. And I think that's where the story unwound for them, and the public anger and frustration, I think, is built up as a result of that situation, because no one was taking personal responsibility for the situation in which companies found themselves in. Companies which, incidentally, had a balance sheet bigger than the GDP of the United Kingdom.
If cards had gone slightly differently, if there could have been others here rather than you facing the music, or whether you're particularly personally culpable.
Oh, I don't feel I am particularly personally culpable.
Well, thank you. Sir Fred Goodwin, how much worse could it have been at RBS if you hadn't been in charge?
Well, I think I fully accept my responsibility. It was post-Lehman's that the collapse in confidence, the collapse in markets just came round and hit us, and we were caught at that point. It was very sudden and very sharp. Could it have happened to others?
I keep hearing about the requirement for brilliance. We need to attract, and people keep telling me all the time, we need to attract the most brilliant. Are there people out there who are more brilliant who could have done a better job than you with RBS?
There may well be. It would seem unreasonable for me to conclude that there weren't.
We have, I suppose, a long tradition in the UK of putting people in the stocks in the middle of villages and throwing tomatoes at them. But the reality of something like the difficulties here, the credit crunch that is, and I keep on saying this and will continue to say it, is a global matter. How we actually deal with it, I think, has to be a little bit better, if I may say.
Do you think your industry's been demonised by these hearings?
Well, of course it's been demonised. I mean, there are problems. I mean, I'm not pretending that the industry was perfect. Of course it wasn't. Of course it wasn't. But the majority of the banks are actually managing quite well.
So Fred, I think in 2007 your remuneration was 4.1 million or thereabouts, of which about 2/3 was in the form of bonus. Mr Hornby, I think the figure for you was about 1.9 million, about half of which was bonus. Can you tell us, please, what those figures would be for 2008?
Well, there's no bonus being paid for 2008.
And total remuneration?
My salary for 2008 would be 1.46 million.
Mr Hornby?
There will be no bonus at all payable for 2008. Clearly my salary was roughly in line with the previous year.
I have to say 99% of my constituents feel that if a great black hole opened up and every merchant banker in the world, an arbitrage trader and credit derivative inventor disappeared down it, the world would be a better place. And could we get back to Captain Mannering running a bank we could trust?
Well, I recognise that sentiment.
Thank you.
So what I'm concerned about, actually, and I think it was referenced by a number of other members here, that it's just too simple if you want to blame it all on me. Yeah. You want to blame it all on me and close the book. That'll get the job done very quickly, but it does not go anywhere close to the cause of it.
The MPs and the rest of the country were startled to learn that Sir Fred Goodwin had held on to his pension of £700,000 a year. At a later hearing, the committee asked the recently appointed, and some thought politically inexperienced City Minister Lord Miners, why the government had allowed that to happen.
If Fred's agreement is watertight, then he can do nothing at all. And he's out the trap with a clean pair of heels, and he's really left the government flat-footed. That's the summation of it.
Well, I think one has to admire, in a non-approving sense, the dexterity of Sir Fred Goodwin in respect of his own contract.
You've left me with the thought that you admire Sir Fred's dexterity, but at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer that's a bloody mug here.
Yes, and I was very careful to say what I did not approve.
Sir Fred later gave some of his pension back, but that was just one of the occasions when the chairman's exasperation showed. Those hearings are in part about performance, and MPs are looking for cooperation, as those who've given evidence know well.
It's not something that you just breeze into without thinking, without doing, your own revision, your own homework, you're getting your own ideas lined up first. You do need to do that.
Not only are you surrounded by this sort of inquisition, all these interrogators, you're flanked by journalists and sketch writers, and you know that quite a lot of them are just desperate for you to make a complete fool of yourself.
A classic example was that of John Kingman, the former Treasury civil servant who became head of UKFI, the holding company which controlled an impressive list of nationalised banks. He'd failed to arm himself with the facts and figures the committee asked for.
How many staff at each of RBS, Lloyds Banking Group, Northern Rock and Bradford and Bingley were paid more than £100,000 in 2008?
I don't have that figure available, I'm afraid.
Could you send those precise details to us?
I can certainly ask the banks.
Okay, so how many staff at each of the 4 firms received bonuses in cash and shares combined in 2008 greater than £100,000 and £1 million?
Again, we do not have those figures. We can ask the banks whether they wish to disclose those figures.
Did you contact these individual companies and ask for that information?
No.
Is it worth getting on with this session?
They're not easy. They're not designed to be easy. And I think sometimes people do find them immensely intimidating, frankly.
We were briefed on a number of broad areas we expected the committee to ask. I had not understood that there was a specific request to ask the banks for this information. We are happy to ask them whether they're willing to provide that information.
The clerk is telling me that you were phoned on Friday and asked specifically.
Well, I apologise. That message certainly had not reached me with that clarity, and I apologise for that.
Well, I think that's scandalous, to be quite honest with you. And I think it's a bad start for UKFI.
The MPs ended up conducting several parallel inquiries into what was by now a multifaceted crisis, not just on the fall of individual banks, but on the crisis as a whole. The UK was in recession, and the government had sought to boost the economy with massive injections of cash, what economists call a fiscal stimulus. The hearings gave a platform to some key witnesses. Looking back, perhaps the single most important contribution came from the Governor of the Bank of England, whose style baffled some, but clearly endeared him to others.
I like Mervyn. I mean, I think he's a class act. And he uses us, in the best sense, extremely well. And I think it's a very fruitful relationship that has developed.
The first couple of times I sketched Mervyn King, I found it very difficult because he's very sort of, shifty is the wrong word, he's incredibly sort of academic and gnomic.
He also picks his words with exquisite care. They are said extremely softly, and you don't realise he's let off a bomb until you've gone out and sort of really taken on board what he said.
He talks about the unconventional unconventionals as opposed to the conventional unconventionals. And then at one point he says, what they're saying about savers, what are we going to do about savers? And he said, I call that the paradox of policy. I mean, it means absolutely nothing to anyone, really, except Mervyn King, possibly.
Well, I think this goes back to what I call the paradox of policy, and that's what I call the unconventional purchases. But then the other operation, what I call the conventional unconventional purchases, is about a relatively standard use for the central bank, which is to buy government gilts in the secondary market.
But the moment came when everyone understood. The governor gave an emphatic warning about the dangers of the government taking on too much more debt.
Well, I think it was an important moment because there was a debate within government at the time about a second fiscal stimulus, and Mervyn King's comments brought that debate up sharply, and I think it had an implication in government policy.
A bit of a thunderclap over Whitehall.
It was. Mervyn King delivered it, very, very smoothly and quietly in the committee, but I think it did have that thunderclap.